You've found nightfall murmurs. When day fades into silence, the world begins to whisper. Some stories come as murmurs, some as warnings, but they all come at night. Don't be afraid to listen, but never listen alone. Though the Caribbean sun pressed its weight onto the polished teak of the azure serpent, an insistent iciness had taken root deep within me. 5 days adrift on what promised paradise, yet my thoughts snagged relentlessly on the vacant cabin adjacent to mine, on the tightening coil of apprehension in my gut. Something felt profoundly wrong aboard this vessel, and the chilling suspicion grew. Perhaps I alone perceived the shift. I am Clara Vance, 34, a software architect more accustomed to Seattle's grey hum than tropical radiance. This voyage was meant as balm after a grueling project completion. 7 days of sun-drenched lethargy, pastel elixirs, and a blessed severance from the digital leash. Now, day 5, and I yearned for the cold comfort of my laptop, for any thread of data to unravel the unfolding strangeness. It began subtly. The second day out, I realized I hadn't glimpsed my neighbor since we'd cast off. We'd exchanged pleasantries during the mandatory muster drill. Eleanor Hayes, celebrating her 40th birthday solo, her enthusiasm for the journey, her eagerness to sample every onboard diversion had been palpable. Then, silence. No sign of her near the turquoise pools, within the clatter of dining halls, nor amidst the orchestrated gaiety of the evening performances. Initially, I rationalized. Divergent rhythms, perhaps. She might be an early bird devotee of the ship's gymnasium while I luxuriated in sleep, or maybe nursing a fierce sunburn behind her locked door. Real worry didn't crystallize until the third day. A tentative knock at her cabin, an invitation to the comedy act poised on my lips, met only stillness. Later that evening, I tried once more. Nothing but the ambient hum of the ship's great engines. Day 4 saw me navigate to the polished expanse of the guest relations counter. The attendant, his name tag proclaiming him Julian, offered a smile of practiced neutrality as I voiced my unease. "I'm quite certain your neighbor is perfectly all right, madam," he intoned, the cadence just a shade too smooth, too formulaic. "Many guests value their privacy, enjoying room service perhaps, the solitude of her veranda." I persisted. "Could you simply verify if her keycard has registered entry, or if any service has been requested?" Julian's smile remained fixed, unwavering, yet something skittered behind his eyes. Annoyance? Or was it a flicker of fear? "Regrettably, I cannot divulge such details, madam. Passenger confidentiality is paramount. Was there some other matter I could assist with?" I retreated, disquieted. His response felt wrong, overly polished, a deflection rather than reassurance. That night, sleep was a skittish creature. I lay rigid in my berth, straining for any sound through the membrane-thin walls separating our cabins. A television's murmur, the pad of footsteps, the hiss of a shower, anything. Only silence answered, profound and absolute. As I turned restlessly, a new, colder thought surfaced. It wasn't merely Eleanor I hadn't seen. Several faces from the cruise's early days seemed absent. The elderly couple flanking me at the captain's welcome dinner, the boisterous cluster of students who dominated the poolside bar. Consciousness frayed as my mind chased possibilities, each more fantastical than the last. By the time dawn painted the porthole with weak light, I was wound tight with a near-panicked certainty. Day 5 became an exercise in vigilance. I installed myself in the ship's grand atrium, a novel serving as my pretext, and charted the currents of passengers and crew. Patterns began to emerge, crew members exchanging furtive whispers, their gazes darting with nervous energy. Sections of the ship quietly barricaded, passengers rerouted with vague pronouncements of routine maintenance, and the passengers, there were fewer. The vessel didn't feel deserted, not precisely, but the density had lessened. Spaces once thronged now offered breathing room. Queues that had snaked now dissolved quickly. As the hours bled away, my disquiet deepened. Fragments of overheard conversations confirmed I wasn't alone in my observations. Other passengers murmuring similar anxieties. Yet invariably, like apparitions, crew members would materialize, deftly redirecting the topic or proffering complimentary beverages, silencing the questions with practiced ease. By evening, the tension was unbearable. I required answers. I steered myself back towards guest relations, resolve hardening. But as I neared, I saw Julian locked in intense dialogue with a man whose bearing marked him as ship security. Their expressions were leaden. I slowed, angling to catch their words without drawing notice. "Can't keep this suppressed much longer," Julian was saying, his usual lacquered composure stripped away. "People are noticing." The security officer gave a grim nod. "Understood. We're managing it as best we can, but if a solution isn't found soon..." His voice trailed off as he registered my approach. Instantly, both faces underwent a startling metamorphosis, worry vanishing beneath masks of pleasant efficiency. "Good evening, madam," Julian chirped, his tone brittle with forced cheerfulness. "How may we assist you?" I hesitated, the carefully constructed inquiry dying on my tongue. The speed and totality of their transformation momentarily made me question my own senses. I was merely checking the entertainment schedule for this evening, I faltered, despising my own sudden cowardice. While Julian recited the night's diversions, my mind spun elsewhere. What couldn't be suppressed? What solution were they desperately seeking? And the crucial, terrifying question, how did it connect to the vanishing passengers? I offered mumbled thanks and walked away, thoughts colliding. I needed clarity, a plan. Seeking refuge and perspective, I ascended to the topmost deck. The night air was a soft balm, the sky strewn with stars, the very picture of brochure-perfect tropical enchantment. Under different circumstances, pure bliss. Leaning on the railing, I gazed into the churning phosphorescent wake trailing behind us, a luminous path back to... What exactly? What had we sailed away from? Towards what unknown were we heading? A soft sound nearby made me turn. A woman approached, her features luminous and pale in the moonlight. Recognition sparked. We'd chatted briefly by the pool on the first day. "Can't sleep either," she ventured, a strained smile barely touching her eyes. I shook my head. "Too much churning upstairs, I suppose." She nodded, joining me at the rail. We stood for a long moment in shared silence, contemplating the vast, indifferent ocean. "Have you noticed," she began finally, her voice scarcely louder than the breeze, "that people seem to be fading away?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Validation. "Yes," I exhaled. "My neighbor, Eleanor. Haven't seen her for days." The woman, Maya, the name surfaced, swiveled towards me, her eyes stark with terror. "My husband," she uttered. "He went for ice late last night. He never returned. Guest services claimed he was admitted to the infirmary, severe seasickness. But when I tried to see him, they barred my way. Said it was quarantined, potential norovirus." A fresh wave of cold washed over me. "Did you believe them?" Maya shook her head, a slow, uncertain motion. "I don't know what to believe now, but I know this ship feels wrong." As if summoned by her words, a scream shredded the night air. Maya and I jolted, spinning towards the sound originating from the deck below. We scrambled for the stairs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in our chests. Reaching the lower level, we encountered a small knot of onlookers clustered near the railing. We pushed through, arriving just as a crewman hauled someone back over the edge. A young woman, early 20s perhaps, convulsing with desolate cries, fighting the crewman's restraining grip. "Let go!" she shrieked. "I need to get off! They aren't human!" An uneasy murmur rippled through the small crowd. An older man, resplendent in an officer's uniform, cut through the onlookers, his calm authority absolute. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your staterooms," he commanded, his voice permitting no dissent. "The young lady has merely had an excess of sun and spirits. She will be well cared for." But as they guided the still resisting woman away, her eyes met mine. There was no intoxication there, only pure, unadulterated terror. Maya's fingers dug into my arm, sharp points against my skin. "Did you hear her?" Maya whispered, her voice quavering. "They aren't human. What could she mean?" I shook my head, words failing me. My thoughts reeled, struggling to assemble the fragments. The missing, the crew's obfuscation, and now this raw display of horror. It defied coincidence. As the onlookers gradually melted away, Maya and I remained frozen, anchored by disbelief. The beautiful evening now felt predatory, the gentle sway of the azure serpent, no longer a cradle rock, but a sinister, rhythmic threat. "What do we do?" Maya asked, her voice thin with fear. I drew a steadying breath, surprised by the steel that entered my own voice. "We find out what's happening," I declared. "Whatever darkness resides on this ship, we expose it before we vanish too." Returning towards our cabins, plotting our uncertain course, I felt an irrevocable shift. The carefree escape was a phantom limb, amputated. We were adrift in alien currents now, sailing towards a mystery far deeper, far darker than the ocean abysses beneath us. And a small, insistent voice in the recesses of my mind posed the terrifying question: even if we unearthed the truth, would we survive to carry it back to shore? A tremor of apprehension, unexpected for someone tethered to reason, prickled my skin the moment my tires crunched onto the gravel drive. Logic is my compass, facts my terrain. The supernatural holds no currency in my world, yet this place, bequeathed by a phantom kinsman via a starkly formal letter, radiated a discordance, an unsettling vibration that defied the placid afternoon light. Logic dictated nerves, the sudden weight of an unwanted inheritance. Instinct whispered otherwise. A shiver traced my arms despite the windless air. A static I tried to dismiss, rubbing damp palms against denim. Mine now, this pile of stone and timber I'd never sought, free and clear. Unkempt grasses clawed towards the sky, a verdant wilderness reclaiming the front yard. I cut the engine, the ensuing silence amplifying the faint, cloying scent of decay, damp earth, mildew, and forgotten things that clung to the atmosphere. The house itself slumped, paint peeling like sunburnt skin, timbers weathered to grey bone. Keys, cold metal from a lawyer's sterile office, grated in the lock before one finally yielded with an echoing click. I hovered on the threshold, inhaling dust and reluctance before stepping across. Gloom swallowed the entryway whole. My boots stirred century-old dust motes that danced in the slivers of light piercing the window grime. Floorboards groaned their ancient complaints underfoot, a chorus of protest at my intrusion. Above, the ceiling vaulted into shadow. Ahead, a corridor stretched like a gullet into the house's depths. My flashlight beam sliced through the murk, revealing spectral furniture shrouded in white sheets, shelves cluttered with the random detritus of a life unknown, and the grand sweep of a staircase ascending into deeper darkness. Room bled into room, a labyrinth I couldn't map on first reconnaissance. Throughout the afternoon, I wrestled with stiff window sashes, letting stale air bleed out and sunlight tentatively probe the interior. Yet the house seemed to breathe around me, faint scuttlings within the walls, the settling groans of timber. Vermin, surely. Old bones settling. Rational explanations warred with a persistent tightness constricting my chest. For sanctuary, I claimed a room near the front entrance, scrubbing away layers of grime. Its door, a slab of reassuringly solid oak, latched firmly, a necessary bulwark I felt, against the encroaching night and the house's secretive size. Darkness seeped in fast, consuming the corners. A single lamp cast a frail circle of light, humming faintly on the house's antiquated electrical system, a network I treated with due caution. Perched on a rickety folding chair unearthed from a corner, I ate a cold meal brought from the outside world, the silence profound save for the occasional pop and creak of the structure breathing around me. No distractions, just the weight of the quiet, pressing in. Unease coiled low in my gut. I tried anchoring my thoughts to mundane tasks, repairs, logistics, the eventual decision to keep or divest this burdensome legacy. Sleep, when it finally came, was a shallow, troubled affair, punctuated by abrupt awakenings to imagined sounds. Then, near the nadir of the night, a sound pulled me bolt upright from the tangled sheets. Footsteps, slow, measured, impossibly heavy, traversing the hallway just beyond my door. Ice formed in my veins. Silence descended again, thick and watchful. And then, thud. Pause. Thud. The pacing resumed, deliberate, relentless. My heart hammered against my ribs. My tongue felt thick, useless. Imagination, I pleaded silently, but the stark clarity of the sound mocked the notion. Abruptly, silence fell once more. Motionless, eyes fixed on the oppressive darkness of the ceiling, I remained. Checking felt unthinkable. No sliver of light breached the gap beneath the door. Sleep became an impossibility, each creak painting vivid images of a sentinel standing mere feet away. Dawn arrived, pale and revealing nothing. The dust lay undisturbed, a perfect gray canvas unmarked by intrusion. Every lock held firm, old timbers shifting, an overtired mind conjuring phantoms. I clung to these rationalizations while unloading the car, the mundane task, a flimsy shield against the persistent chill of unease. The upper floors yielded more secrets. A library lined with the spines of forgotten thoughts, their leather covers cracked like old skin. A study where papers lay scattered as if interrupted mid-sentence. A cramped attic choked with boxes and stale, unmoving air. Nothing overtly spectral, yet the oppressive atmosphere lingered, heavy and watchful. That evening, I placed a lamp in the corridor, a small beacon against the encroaching gloom, hoping its mundane glow might ward off the night's intrusions. Behind my now locked bedroom door, I extinguished my own light, leaving only the thin yellow line beneath the threshold. Every nerve felt raw, tuned to the house's frequency, and it began again, punctually, as if keeping an appointment. The slow tread echoed. My gut clenched. The sound drew nearer, paused directly outside. A breath held in the darkness, then receded. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead. Muscles locked rigid. It returned, back and forth, back and forth. A deliberate, unnerving patrol seemingly designed to fray my sanity. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I watched the doorknob, a brass eye in the darkness, anticipating its turn. But it remained still. For 10 agonizing minutes, the pacing continued, then ceased as abruptly as it began. I strained to hear a breath, a rustle of cloth, anything human. Only silence answered. A primal urge to fling open the door warred with paralyzing fear. My mind cycled through terrifying possibilities, lurking just beyond the wood. Dawn found me sleepless once more. In the morning's grey light, the hallway lamp still burned, but it sat askew on its small table, tilted as if jostled by a careless passerby. I knew, with chilling certainty, I hadn't left it like that. My hand trembled as I righted it. A frantic check confirmed all seals remained intact. Windows latched, doors bolted. The dust near the baseboards offered no clues, no betraying prints. The mystery deepened, coiling tighter. Breakfast was a tasteless necessity. Fueled by frustration, I embarked on a systematic invasion of the house's secrets, peering into shadowed closets, heaving aside dust-laden furniture, tapping walls for hollow spaces. My search led me to the terminus of a long, dim corridor on the second floor, a formidable door of thick, dark wood, secured not by a keyhole, but by a brutish iron padlock filmed with rust. My crowbar glanced off it uselessly. The wood surrounding it felt dense as stone. None of the keys on my ring bore any resemblance. I marked its location in my mind. A challenge deferred, not dismissed. Exhaustion settled deep in my bones by late afternoon. I retreated to the front porch, the outside air a temporary balm, trying to untangle the knot of fear and resolve in my chest. Fleeing seemed sensible. A sterile motel room, perhaps professionals to exorcise the house's secrets. Yet a stubborn refusal to be chased off by shadows, by the unknown, held me fast. Squatter, elaborate prank, an animal mimicking human gait. The cadence of those steps felt too deliberate, too aware for such simple explanations. No, I would remain. I had to understand. That evening, technology became my reluctant ally. I positioned a small camera on a tripod in the hallway, its unblinking lens aimed down the corridor, infrared ready for the dark. Hall lamp on, recording initiated. Retreating to my room, I left the door deliberately unlocked this time, a concession to the need for potential flight. I tried reading a brittle-paged volume from the library, but the words blurred, my hands unsteady. Giving up, I plunged the room into darkness, my gaze fixed on that persistent line of light beneath the door, waiting. Silence stretched, taut and expectant. Sleep hovered, a treacherous fog, just as the familiar cadence returned. Thud. Pause. Thud. I went utterly still, drawing the thin blanket higher, my breath catching in my throat. Every instinct screamed to bolt, to confront, yet paralysis held me fast. Then, a soft click, barely audible. My door drifted inward, perhaps an inch, a widening crack of illuminated floor. The footsteps didn't falter, my muscles turned to stone. Through the gap, a silhouette momentarily eclipsed the light from the hall lamp, casting a fleeting, distorted shadow across my floorboards. Then it was gone. The door whispered shut, seemingly of its own accord. Air refused to enter my lungs. The heavy tread continued its patrol down the corridor before finally dissolving into silence. Sleep was now a forgotten country. With the first hint of dawn, I retrieved the camera, its small red light still blinking faithfully. Playback revealed the empty, lamplit corridor for hours. Then, synced with the remembered time, the audio captured the distinct creak of floorboards. A flicker disturbed the static scene. Slowed down, frame by painstaking frame, a shape emerged from the shadows on the left, indistinct, vaguely human, paused directly opposite my door, then slid silently out of frame to the right. Too amorphous for detail, yet undeniably present. A cold knot formed in my stomach. My mouth went dry as dust. Repeated viewings offered no further clarity. My hands were unsteady as I finally switched the device off. Proof of a sort, but more terrifying than ignorance. Fueled by a volatile mix of dread and resolve, I armed myself. Flashlight, hammer, crowbar, feeling both foolish and deeply threatened. The attic yielded only dust, cobwebs clinging to forgotten trunks, no conceivable human refuge. Back on the second floor, the locked room resisted again. The padlock met the hammer with defiant solidity, the surrounding timber unyielding. Prying it seemed reckless, risking structural damage. Was there another way? Circling the house's exterior, tracing the second-floor windows, my eyes snagged on one anomaly, a window completely obscured by heavy boards nailed fast from the inside. Its position corresponded precisely with the impenetrable room. The wood looked ancient, weathered, but firmly secured. The rest of the house, meticulously searched, offered no further clues, no sign of corporeal occupation. Evening descended again, thick with frustration. I slumped in the front living room, muscles aching, the vast silence pressing in. One last attempt before resorting to force. Tonight I wouldn't hide. I would wait. I positioned a hard-backed chair at the nexus of the main hallway and the staircase, facing the corridor favored by the footsteps. Flashlight and camera rested beside me, a small lamp casting elongated shadows on the floor. Hours crawled by. My spine stiffened, drowsiness tugged despite the tension. Then, Past midnight, a distinct creak. My eyes flew open. I swept the flashlight beam down the main hall. Empty. Another groan, this time from behind me, toward the second floor. I whirled, heart leaping. The corridor leading to the locked room stretched vacant and dim. A knot tightened in my throat. Rising slowly, flashlight held before me like a talisman. I listened to the frantic drumming of my own pulse. I forced myself forward, each step echoing unnaturally loud. Check at doorways left and right, palms slick with sweat. Reaching the end of the hall, the locked door loomed, radiating a palpable coldness. I pressed my ear to the wood. Beneath the rush of my own blood, a faint sound emerged, a dry, skittering scrape, like fingernails on stone. My stomach plummeted. I recoiled, flashlight beam trembling on the impassive padlock. It held fast, and then I froze. A shadow detached itself from the gloom along the wall to my right. Elongated, impossibly tall, moving with a fluid grace that wasn't walking. It glided. My legs threatened to buckle. I whipped the flashlight beam towards it. Nothing. Only empty wall. An icy wave washed over me, prickling the skin on my neck, locking my shoulders. A wordless cry died in my throat. I scrambled backward, retreating toward the stairs, turned and half fell, half ran down them, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Bursting into my ground floor room, I slammed the door, fumbled the lock, and collapsed against it, breath tearing through me in ragged gasps. Silence descended again from the upper floors. Eventually, I crawled onto the bed, staring sightlessly at the ceiling, tremors racking my body long into the dawn. The arrival of daylight felt less like relief and more like a ceasefire. I needed distance. In the anonymous bustle of a nearby town cafe, nursing bitter coffee, I weighed my options. The police? What could I report? Unsettling noises, a fleeting shadow on tape. Hiring someone to breach the door felt plausible. Fleeing remained tempting. Yet the house, the locked room, the presence, they held a gravitational pull. An insistence on answers gnawed at me. Before leaving town, I visited a hardware store, emerging with heavy-duty bolt cutters. The decision was made. Returning as twilight bled across the sky, I felt the house settle around me, a watchful, waiting stillness palpable in the air. I deposited the newly acquired tools in the living room, their metallic weight a counterpoint to the tremor in my hands. Patience, I told myself. Morning light would offer courage, a better time to confront the locked door. But the prospect of enduring another night within these walls stretched before me like an eternity, thin and frayed. So here I sit, lamplight carving a small island in the encroaching dark, the cold steel of the bolt cutters near my feet. Upstairs the house murmurs, the groan of ancient timbers, or perhaps something else. Each faint scrape, each distant thump sends adrenaline spiking through my veins. My gaze keeps drifting to the shadowed maw of the staircase, half expecting a figure to coalesce there. A dull throb pulses behind my temples. My throat is parched. Yet beneath the fear runs a current of resolve. Whatever secret festers within that locked room, whatever presence walks these halls, I intend to confront it. Why does it remain? Come dawn, I will breach that door. Until then, I wait, listening to the house's whispers, battling the instinct to flee. Ignorance is no longer an option. This house holds its truths tightly, but I am determined to wrench them free. Optimism, not apprehension, was my companion the day I first crossed the threshold of Suite 3B. The lease, signed a week prior, felt crisp with promise in my memory. My modest desk supplies were unpacked, the laptop humming quietly, even the overhead fluorescent tubes inspected and approved. Everything presented as perfectly mundane. A faint, lingering ghost of old paint permeated the air, a scent I dismissed as easily as one might wave away a harmless fly. My ambitions were straightforward. Establish Silas Thorne accounting, cultivate a local clientele, remain tethered to the earth of tangible goals. The building's past held no currency for me. I sought only a dependable stage for my professional life. On the day the keys became mine, my attention snagged briefly on a hulking built-in wardrobe dominating one wall. Its timbered door, aged and somber, was secured by a lock the color of bruised plums. A cursory glance, a single opening and closing, it registered as nothing more than architectural trivia. Little did I suspect this unassuming fixture would soon become the axis around which my anxieties revolved. I am, by nature and profession, a man tethered to the concrete. Figures are my métier, logic my compass. Thus, when minor incongruities began to surface, I readily attributed them to the pressures of a new venture. Mere days into my tenancy, a Tuesday morning greeted me with the wardrobe door slightly ajar. I distinctly recalled securing it the evening before, yet the lapse seemed trivial. Perhaps fatigue had blurred the edges of memory. I nudged it shut, turning the key in the tarnished lock, more from ingrained habit than necessity, though its contents were negligible. Settling at my desk, the laptop's glow drew me in, and within hours, the wardrobe faded from my thoughts, submerged beneath columns of numbers and client correspondence. Around midday, seeking the brief solace of a sandwich, I stepped out. Upon my return, the door stood open once more, not gaping, but parted by a few distinct inches. The lock dangled loosely, rotated as if by a key. Approaching, I placed my hand on the knob. Its surface felt unnaturally cool against my skin. Fine fissures webbed the wood nearby, silent testimony, perhaps, to years of forceful encounters. I scrutinized the antique lock, finding no telltale scratches, no hint of violation. Gently, I closed the door again, resolving to banish it from my mind. For the remainder of that afternoon, concentration held firm. As twilight bled through the window, I performed a deliberate check before departing. The door was shut fast. A tentative jiggle of the handle confirmed it was locked. Shrugging off the peculiarity, I headed home. 2 days hence, I arrived to find the wardrobe resolutely locked. This, in itself, wasn't alarming, except for the certainty that I hadn't engaged the lock upon leaving. That action was reserved for moments of heightened, usually unfounded caution. The door refused to yield. Retrieving the large, old-fashioned key from my desk drawer, I unlocked it. Inside, my spare folders and supply boxes rested undisturbed, precisely as I'd left them. Nothing appeared missing. I mentally filed the incident under building quirks and dismissed it. But then, the folders began their phantom migrations. Initially, I accused myself of carelessness. A search for Ellington Holdings 2022 would prove fruitless one moment, the file inexplicably absent from its designated spot on the shelf. The following day, it would materialize exactly where I'd searched. This strange ballet repeated itself with various client files. I recall one Wednesday afternoon needing crucial documents for an imminent call with a prospective client, frantically poring through the wardrobe's contents. Annoyance prickled my skin. I systematically emptied the shelves, creating teetering stacks on the floor, rifling through each one. I peered behind boxes, slid my hand beneath stacked papers, even checked inside a disused binder. Nothing. Defeated, I had to postpone the call. The next morning, reaching into the closet for an unrelated item, my eyes fell upon the missing folder, perched neatly atop the very pile I'd meticulously searched. A jolt, cold and sharp, ran through me. I hadn't touched the wardrobe since my fruitless excavation. The folder was simply there, mocking my previous efforts. A subtle disquiet began to thread itself through my days. Not fear, precisely, but a persistent, low-level unease. My lifelong meticulousness warred with the evidence, or lack thereof. I knew my organizational habits. They were the bedrock of my profession. Yet, possessing no tangible proof beyond my own increasingly suspect memory, I kept the incidents contained within the four walls of that office and the tighter confines of my own mind. One afternoon, however, the ambiguity shattered. Engrossed in spreadsheet data entry, a subtle creak pierced the office quiet. My first thought was the main door, or perhaps a window sash shifting in its frame. Then, movement flickered at the edge of my vision. I froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and slowly turned my head. The wardrobe door was inching open, not abruptly, but with a slow, deliberate grace that culminated in a soft, drawn-out sigh of stressed wood. My chest constricted, breath hitched in my throat. I stared, transfixed, at the widening sliver of darkness within. No figure lurked behind it. No discernible draft stirred the air. Nothing offered a rational explanation. My pulse hammered against my eardrums. Rising cautiously, I crossed the room. My hand closed around the cool knob, pushing the door shut. A peculiar chill traced paths along my forearms. The door hadn't felt loose. It offered a slight, almost reluctant resistance. There was no obvious warp or gap that might invite such independent motion. I attempted to replicate the phenomenon, opening the door halfway and releasing it. It remained static. Cracking it open just an inch and letting go yielded the same result: immobility. The slow, spectral swing I had witnessed remained stubbornly irreproducible. Thereafter, solitude in the office acquired a distinct, unpleasant charge. Every incidental noise, the gurgle of pipes, the settling groan of the old structure, made me flinch. Sometimes, faint tapping sounds seemed to emanate from within the wardrobe, like dry leaves skittering across wood. I entertained notions of hidden ventilation shafts or loose back panels, yet thorough inspections revealed nothing. Old buildings have their voices, I reasoned. Their groans and sighs are expected, but this felt curated, intentional. Driven by a need for objective proof, I decided to employ my phone as a silent witness. Propped on my desk, its lens trained squarely on the wardrobe, I let it record while I worked. The first hour-long session yielded nothing but the low drone of my computer fan. Reviewing the footage revealed absolute stillness. Over the ensuing days, I repeated the experiment, sometimes leaving the phone recording while I stepped out for coffee. On one such occasion, I returned to find the door ajar, yet the recording was pristine. The door, perfectly framed throughout the duration, showed no movement whatsoever. The only captured sounds were distant footsteps in the corridor and the muted thrum of street traffic below. It was maddening. The visual evidence flatly contradicted the physical reality before me. Doubt began to gnaw at my conviction. Was I forgetting? Misremembering the door's position? Viewing it from distorting angles? Yet the recurring enigma of the migrating folders resisted such easy psychological dismissal. I reverted to logic, meticulously examining the lock, the hinges, the door's very structure. Everything seemed solid, if antiquated. Rust bloomed subtly on the hinge pins. The lock mechanism was a classic tumbler type, operated by a large, slightly ornate key. I queried the building manager. Did he possess a duplicate key? Had anyone else reported anomalies? He assured me he held only the master key for the main office door, possessing no access to individual fixtures like my wardrobe. His demeanor seemed genuine. Deceit served no apparent purpose. One evening, immersed in quarterly reports, I lingered well past usual business hours. Around 8 o'clock, the office was submerged in quietude, the corridor lights casting long, dim shadows. The distant hum of the elevator punctuated the stillness, but my floor seemed deserted. Standing to stretch, my gaze inevitably fell upon the wardrobe. It appeared shut, yet an insistent urge propelled me towards it. Turning the knob, I pulled the door open. The familiar scent of dust and dry wood greeted me. My document boxes and binders occupied the lower shelf. Stepping closer, I felt the weight of the motionless air within. My fingers traced the back panel, solid, perhaps faintly damp to the touch. No cracks, no discernible openings. A light rap produced only a dull, dense thud. No hollowness, no hidden space, nothing. Leaving the door wide open, I positioned my phone on a nearby chair, lens fixed on the wardrobe's interior, and hit record. "Is anyone here?" The words felt foolish, theatrical, hanging in the charged silence, but frustration demanded action, however irrational. Nothing responded, no shift in the air, no sound beyond my own slightly ragged breathing. My throat felt tight, tension coiled in my shoulders. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the door, watching it intently. It remained shut. I locked it, jiggled the handle for good measure, firm. Returning to the phone, I stopped the recording. Later review confirmed the utter lack of phenomena, capturing only my solitary exploration and unanswered query, echoing faintly in the empty room. Weeks bled into months. The pattern persisted. Folders vanished only to reappear days later. The door presented itself sometimes open upon my arrival, sometimes locked when I knew I'd left it unsecured. I began browsing online retailers for small, dedicated security cameras, hoping a purpose-built device might prove more reliable than my phone. A modest, motion-activated camera was acquired and mounted on a small tripod near my desk, its unblinking eye aimed directly at the wardrobe, ensuring the entire door remained within its frame. I resolved to review the footage diligently each evening. The first day of surveillance yielded nothing. The camera remained dormant. I found the door locked in the morning and left it locked. The second day, however, I arrived to find it slightly ajar. Eagerly, I reviewed the camera's memory card. Blank. The motion sensor had never triggered. According to the digital record, the door hadn't budged. Frustration warred with a rising tide of dread. Something was undeniably occurring, yet it remained stubbornly invisible to objective measurement. No alarm sounded, no signs of forced entry existed. Only this bizarre, cyclical haunting of open doors, closed locks, and peripatetic documents. My thoughts turned to the office's previous occupants. Who were they? A query to the property manager yielded vague recollections. Other accountants, perhaps a small legal practice. Detailed tenancy records, he explained apologetically, were lost to time or bureaucratic indifference. Crucially, no prior complaints of anything unusual existed in his memory. Brief conversations with neighboring tenants on my floor elicited little more than shrugs and jokes about the building's advanced age and inherent quirks. One mentioned occasional strange noises from the plumbing, but nothing resembling doors with minds of their own. I attempted to cultivate indifference, shifting my desk slightly towards the window, minimizing the wardrobe's presence in my peripheral vision. Yet the faintest creak from that direction could still tighten my stomach muscles, still send a jolt through my system. Just the building settling, I'd tell myself, clinging to rational explanations like a man overboard clutches driftwood. But the reappearance of a missing file, mocking my frantic searches, invariably eroded that composure. A muttered curse, a spike in my pulse. These became familiar refrains. Then, hours later, the file would be back, nestled innocently amongst its brethren. One night, resolve hardened within me. I would confront this, whatever it was. Again, I stayed late, secured the main office door, and set up the camera on its tripod, aiming it at the wardrobe. I sat in my desk chair, affording myself a clear, unobstructed view. A bright desk lamp bathed the area in stark illumination. Taking a deep breath, I flung the wardrobe door wide open. "All right," I announced to the empty room, my voice sounding thin and absurdly formal. "I require some clarification." The open wardrobe gaped back, revealing its mundane cargo of files and office detritus. The air remained heavy, still. For half an hour I sat, scarcely moving, eyes fixed on the open space, searching for any flicker, any shift. Sweat beaded on my forehead. My eyes began to burn from the unwavering focus, but the door remained utterly passive. Finally, I rose and approached the open wardrobe again. I ran my hands along the interior surfaces, the shelves, the edges of the doorframe. I tapped the back panel repeatedly. Then, near the hinges on the left side, a sudden, intense cold enveloped my fingers, sharp and distinct, like plunging my hand into icy water. I snatched my hand back, heart leaping into my throat. Hesitantly, I reached out again to the same spot. The coldness was gone, vanished as quickly and inexplicably as it had appeared. Shaken, I closed the door, turned the key in the lock, and retreated to my desk. The recording, when reviewed later, showed only my solitary investigation, my brief recoil, and my return to the chair. No visible cause for the chill, no independent movement, nothing. So, this is my equilibrium now. I coexist with the phenomenon. The door continues its unpredictable cycle of opening and locking. Folders embark on their temporary sabbaticals, only to return, unannounced, a day or two later. Critical documents now reside solely in the digital realm. The wardrobe is relegated to storing items of lesser importance. Faint knocks or clicks occasionally drift from its direction, sounds I consciously try to filter out, attributing them to fatigue, the building's age, or the tricks of an overstressed mind. Yet a deeper certainty persists. It is more than that. I rarely speak of it. The few friends confided in offer predictable advice. Move offices, replace the wardrobe. But relocation is disruptive, costly, and replacing the built-in structure feels both expensive and potentially futile. Would altering the physical object truly silence the intangible? Part of me yearns for investigation, for answers, while another, perhaps wiser part, counsels avoidance. There is no crime to report, no evidence to present, only my own subjective, uncorroborated experiences. And so, I remain. Each morning, stepping into the office is accompanied by a ritual, a glance towards the wardrobe, assessing its state. Open, closed, locked. Sometimes all is as I left it. Other times, a subtle discrepancy. A misplaced file, the door cracked open, sends a familiar thump through my chest. A fleeting surge of adrenaline. Then, I compartmentalize. I work, I answer the phone, respond to emails, navigate the predictable currents of my profession. I find myself wondering about those who occupied this space before me. Did they too experience these gentle, persistent hauntings? Did they attempt recordings? Or did they simply learn to adapt, to ignore? The property manager, amiable but uninformative about the deeper past, offers no clues. It remains simply an old building, housing an old wardrobe with peculiar habits. For now, my phone stays readily accessible, poised to capture evidence should a noise arise. Yet, invariably, the moment I press record, silence descends. The door remains inert. Activity ceases. The instant the recording stops, the subtle clicks and creaks might resume. There is no logical explanation, only the daily reality of my small, aged office. I proceed with my work, but a baseline tension hums constantly beneath the surface, tightening my muscles whenever I pass that wardrobe. No one else witnesses these events. No one else shares this strange, quiet disruption. It is mine alone to navigate. Perhaps it is an echo, a residue of something long past. Perhaps it is merely my own psyche, frayed by stress, projecting onto the inanimate. I possess no proof, only the evidence of my senses. And every time that quiet creak sounds, my stomach clenches. Sometimes I stride over and slam the door shut with unnecessary force. Other times, I let it stand open, affecting an indifference I do not feel. Regardless, complete relaxation remains elusive. That is the texture of my working life now. Moving forward, managing accounts, while forever listening, forever waiting for the next soft click of the lock, the next inexplicable vanishing act within the wardrobe that refuses to stay put. It isn't dramatic, it's just Silas Thorne, his numbers, and a closet possessed of a quiet, persistent will of its own, forever keeping him on edge. Memory crystallizes around the first instance, the initial tremor in the quiet fabric of night. It was the dead hour past midnight, perhaps 1 o'clock precisely. Julian lay adrift in bed, consciousness slowly returning from the depths, plumbed after a taxing workday, his thoughts untroubled, his gaze lost in the Stygian geography of the ceiling. Then, slicing through the stillness, 3 sharp raps upon the glass. Not a frantic pounding, but a measured, hollow percussion against his bedroom window pane. He sat bolt upright, senses instantly aflame. He stared towards the window, its secrets veiled by the heavy curtains. Silence flooded back in, absolute and profound. An anomaly, surely. His apartment perched on the 3rd floor, a sheer brick face dropping to the pavement below. No ledge, no fire escape, no terrestrial explanation for a visitor at his window. A random settling sound, perhaps? A stray gust of wind? A disoriented night bird? He wrestled the thought down, attributing it to mundane causes, and courted sleep once more. Yet the echo of those 3 taps lingered, a persistent resonance in the chambers of his mind, until exhaustion finally claimed him, leaving the assumption that it was a singular event, never to recur. The following night, however, proved that assumption baseless. The summons returned, punctual as a phantom clock chime. This time, Julian was poised, not yet surrendered to sleep, but submerged in the glow of his phone, a silent vigil kept against the possibility. As the hour hand crept towards 1, the sound manifested again. Tap, tap, tap. Brevity and clarity, right on the glass. A cold fist clenched around his heart. He felt the frantic pulse drumming in his throat. With painstaking slowness, careful to betray no movement, he eased the curtain aside. The vista offered only the familiar geometry of the building opposite, its dark bulk punctuated by sparse, indifferent squares of light. Nothing clung to his window. The glass gleamed faintly under the distant streetlights, immaculate. No proximate branches swayed, no errant pipes offered purchase. A faint zephyr stirred the air, but nothing capable of such deliberate noise. He strained his ears against the pre-dawn hush, seeking the flutter of wings or the scrape of claws, but heard only the profound quietude peculiar to the city's deepest slumber. After a minute suspended in vigilant stillness, he let the curtain fall, retreating into the shadowed silence of his room. Sleep, when it finally arrived an hour later, was a troubled, shallow thing. Night 3 brought the inevitable reprise. Same time, same signature. 3 distinct raps, neither aggressive nor timid, directly upon the pane. This time, reflex trumped caution. The instant the sound registered, Julian surged from the bed, yanking the curtain back with a single violent motion. He pressed his face close to the cool glass, peering down into the shadowed street. Emptiness. He scanned left, then right, his focus narrowing to the window frame itself, searching for imperfections, cracks, anything amiss. Nothing. He recoiled slightly, standing there in the dim room, clad only in shorts and a t-shirt, the fine hairs on his forearms erect, his muscles taut. A sudden impulse seized him. He fumbled with the latch, raised the sash swiftly, and thrust his head out into the nocturnal air. The street below lay deserted. Parked cars gleamed dully under sodium lamps. The sidewalk stretched vacant. No figures lurked in doorways. No creatures stirred. Gazing upwards revealed only the impassive brickwork of higher floors. After a minute absorbing the chill, the silence, the sheer normality of the scene, he withdrew, closing and locking the window. A film of cold sweat bloomed beneath his arms, incongruous in the cool room. A peculiar heaviness settled in his stomach, as if he'd swallowed stones. Sleep that night was a fragmented, restless affair. Dawn brought resolve. The gnawing unease, the gritty soreness behind his eyes from fractured sleep, these demanded action. Fortified by coffee, Julian descended to the street, circling the building's perimeter, his gaze fixed upwards, scrutinizing the facade. His bedroom window, facing the street, offered no apparent vulnerability. No tenacious tree limbs clawed at that height. No loose wires or stray cables danced nearby. His window opened onto nothing but air and gravity, a straight plunge to the concrete below. The building itself, a solid construction of brick and glass, presented no obvious defects, no dangling gutters, no crumbling ornamentation. His investigation yielded precisely nothing. He returned indoors, a knot of irritation tightening within him. That evening, he lay in wait, phone clutched like a talisman, its flashlight function primed. 1 o'clock arrived, and with it, the familiar triple tap. He sprang up, simultaneously ripping back the curtain and thumbing the bright beam of his phone. The light speared the darkness, illuminating nothing, just glass. He slid the window open again, extending his arm, sweeping the powerful light across the exterior. Only the silent sentinel of the building across the way met his beam, its windows dark or curtained. He leaned precariously, angling the light up, then down. Still nothing. He held the position for long moments, his arm growing heavy, the cool night air raising gooseflesh on his skin. Finally, defeated, he pulled back, secured the window. His heart still hammered against his ribs, a dull ache throbbing behind his eyes. Sleep remained elusive. The subsequent nights became a laboratory of failed experiments. He tried retiring earlier, hoping slumber might render him immune, only to be jolted awake at the appointed hour by the insistent rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. No more, no less. He'd switch on the bedside lamp, glare at the inert window. The knocking ceased instantly. A glance at his phone confirmed the time, always hovering around 1:02 a.m. He tried leaving the curtains open, gambling on catching the phenomenon in the act. The taps came again. He was staring directly at the glass, yet perceived no flicker of movement, no shadow play, no reflected anomaly, just the sound, dull yet distinct. His jaw clenched involuntarily, his throat felt parched. Rising, he ran his fingertips over the cool, smooth surface of the pane. He checked the locks, ran his hand along the frame, peered at the narrow outer ledge. Everything appeared utterly ordinary. A creeping dread began to colonize the hour before midnight. Anticipation became a physical sensation, a tightening in his chest, a restless energy. He attempted distractions. Music piped directly into his ears via headphones. But as the critical hour neared, he'd inevitably pause the sound, pull the buds free, and listen, suspended in tense expectation. The knocks would arrive, punctual and precise, sending him scrambling to the window once more. One night, emboldened by frustration, he called out immediately after the sound, his voice a low, strained query. "Who's there?" Silence answered. He tried reciprocity, rapping his own knuckles 3 times against the inner glass. Nothing. He listened intently for retreating footsteps on the pavement below, for muffled voices, but the street offered only its usual nocturnal stillness, punctuated occasionally by the distant sigh of a passing car. He sought counsel from Mr. Albright, the building superintendent, a man whose perpetual expression seemed fixed between boredom and mild suspicion. Standing in the echoing lobby, Albright listened, arms crossed, offering platitudes about aging pipes and thermal expansion in the heating system. Julian knew the difference. This wasn't the groan of plumbing, it was a targeted percussion on glass, originating outside. He conveyed this certainty, but Albright remained unconvinced, merely shrugging. Julian thanked him curtly and departed, feeling more isolated than before. Broaching the subject with neighbors felt like a violation of the building's unspoken code of mutual anonymity. Besides, what could they offer but skepticism? No one else had voiced complaints. One night, he deployed his phone as an impartial witness, placing it on the bedside table, activating the audio recorder minutes before the expected time. He lay still, breathing shallowly, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the window. The knocks arrived, right on schedule. Later, reviewing the recording, he heard them clearly. 3 faint, distinct taps, stark against the ambient silence. Proof, tangible evidence of... what? An inexplicable noise. The following day, he subjected the window frame to microscopic scrutiny, examining every millimeter. No hairline fractures, no loose fittings, screws tight, seals intact. Pressing firmly on the glass from inside produced no rattle. Pushing against the frame confirmed its solidity. A few evenings later, he altered his location, settling in the living room, which faced a different aspect of the city. He left his bedroom door ajar, straining to hear. Precisely at 1, a faint iteration of the sound seemed to filter through the wall. He sprinted into the bedroom, hoping to surprise whatever entity was responsible, flicking on the light as he burst through the door and rushed to the window. The view outside was, as always, utterly vacant. The silence pressed in, almost physically painful. He stood panting, hands trembling slightly, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. Fatigue became his constant companion, dragging at him, blurring the edges of his days. His sleep cycle lay in ruins. He experimented with staying out late, deliberately avoiding his apartment during the critical hour, wandering the darkened streets until 2 or 3 in the morning. Upon returning, however, the bedroom always felt subtly disturbed, charged with a residual wrongness. He'd find himself compelled to check the window, tracing the glass with his fingertips. He fancied he detected minuscule imperfections near the edges, faint abrasions almost too small to see, perhaps imagined. Touching them revealed only smooth, cold glass. He even meticulously cleaned the exterior pane from the inside, using a long-handled tool and microfiber cloth, listening for the scrape of some hidden object. Nothing. One desperate evening, he contrived a rudimentary trap. Armed with strips of adhesive tape and small squares of paper, he leaned precariously out the window, heart thudding against his ribs. The vulnerability of his position, 3rd floor, clinging to the frame with one hand while affixing the flimsy paper sentinels with the other, amplified his anxiety. He'd scanned the street below beforehand, ensuring no observers witnessed his strange preparations. Trap set, he closed the window, drew the curtain, and waited. The knocks came, punctual as ever. The next morning, he checked his handiwork. The paper squares hung undisturbed, the tape smooth and secure. No rips, no creases, no indication of contact. Frustration gnawed deeper. He considered enlisting a friend, but schedules stubbornly refused to align. One acquaintance, sympathetic but pragmatic, urged him to ignore it, advice Julian found impossible to heed. The sound was too specific, too relentlessly consistent. Always 3 taps, always near 1 a.m. Weeks bled into a month, then more. Dark circles became permanent fixtures beneath his eyes. He felt perpetually jumpy, wired. Nightfall brought a familiar tension, lying rigid in bed, fists clenched, neck aching. He tried preemptive strikes with a high-powered flashlight, sweeping the beam across the exterior the moment the first tap sounded. Down, side to side, upward. He half expected to illuminate something tangible. A large moth, a bat caught in an updraft, a dangling piece of debris. He saw only brick, glass, and empty air. He studied the Faison building again, searching for misaligned balconies or windows from which someone might project the sound, or a laser pointer. Nothing lined up. The windows opposite remained dark or curtained voids. Could the sound originate within? The glass itself, some strange internal stress? It seemed unlikely. The quality of the sound felt external, like knuckles or a small pebble striking the surface, possessing a certain weight, not a mere mechanical tick. He tried earplugs, thick foam barriers against the world. He still heard it, muffled, distant, yet undeniably present, jerking him from the cusp of sleep. He nearly tore the plugs out in his haste to reach the window. The scene remained unchanged. He tried sleeping on the living room sofa, bedroom door firmly shut. Around 1, a faint disturbance seemed to reach him through the wall. He crept back into the bedroom, standing sentinel in the darkness until 2, but the primary event did not repeat itself within his earshot. The next night yielded the same result. Waking on the sofa shortly after 1, rushing to the bedroom, feeling acutely that he had just missed it. The tension escalated, becoming an almost unbearable pressure. He approached Mr. Albright again, armed with the audio recording. The superintendent listened, then dismissed it as ambient noise, perhaps a neighbor's tapping echoing strangely. Julian insisted the sound was on. His window, he could sometimes feel the faint vibration through the pane. Albright offered vague promises of investigating one night, promises that evaporated with the morning light, lost to feigned forgetfulness or genuine indifference. Julian abandoned that avenue. He tried leaving the window slightly ajar, cracked open a few inches. At 1 a.m. Tap, tap, tap. How? How could something knock on a pane of glass that wasn't fully closed? He shot up, checked. The window remained open as he'd left it. The sound had been identical, seemingly on the glass itself, or perhaps the frame. He reached out into the night air, running his hand along the smooth exterior sill and surround. Nothing loose, nothing out of place. He shut the window tightly, standing rigid, jaw clamped shut. Time unraveled, measured in sleepless nights and punctual disturbances. The knocking persisted, immutable. Julian's quest for explanation became an obsession. Each night birthed a new, futile strategy. He set up his phone on a makeshift tripod, recording video, ensuring the night vision capability was active. The morning review was always the same. The audio track captured the 3 familiar taps, but the video feed showed only the static reflection of his room in the dark glass. No external movement, no light fluctuations, just the sudden, disembodied sound. He scrutinized the footage frame by agonizing frame. Nothing. He refined his tactile approach, lying awake with his fingertips resting lightly on the window frame, waiting. When the knocks came, he felt it. A subtle, definite tremor transmitted through the material. It was external. It was real. The conviction solidified, leaving the central question starker than ever. What could possibly reach his third-floor window, night after night, at the exact same hour, strike it audibly, yet leave no trace and remain unseen? The hour preceding 1 a.m. became a time of profound anxiety. His stomach would clench, sweat would prickle his skin, his pulse accelerating in grim anticipation. Eating dinner sometimes felt impossible. The chronic stress manifested as headaches, a persistent nausea. He took to pacing his apartment restlessly, peering from other windows, checking the hallway through the peephole, listening at his own front door. The rest of his world remained stubbornly normal. Only that one window, at that one time, was subject to this inexplicable visitation. He never discovered the cause. The knocking continued, night after night, a metronome counting out the hours of his unease, 3 taps on the glass. He never saw, never caught, never understood. Albright offered no further assistance. Neighbors remained silent islands. Logic fractured against the persistent reality of the sound. Eventually, the frantic energy of his investigation subsided, replaced not by peace, but by a weary, frayed resignation. He learned to live with it. He would wake at 1, hear the familiar summons, perhaps cast a cursory glance towards the window, find nothing, and then attempt to reclaim sleep. Months hardened into the strange routine. The nervousness never entirely vanished, but it dulled, subsumed into the rhythm of his life. A bizarre, unwelcome fixture. Even now the sound persists, though perhaps less frequently, or perhaps he notices it less. He rearranged the furniture, hung thicker curtains, tried white noise machines. Nothing dissuaded the nocturnal caller. The taps always find their mark. He no longer shouts into the darkness, no longer scrambles to the window, no longer wastes precious energy dissecting the frame or the glass. He simply listens, acknowledges the sound's passage, reminds himself of his utter powerlessness against it, and waits for the ensuing silence. The expectation of answers has long since withered. Solving the riddle is no longer the goal. There is only enduring it. Yet the memory of those initial weeks remains potent. The raw fear, born of the unknown, the clammy sweat on his neck, the visceral clench in his gut, the exhaustion-rimmed eyes scanning the empty night. The knocks themselves were never overtly threatening. The glass never fractured. No intrusion ever occurred. They simply were, a persistent, inexplicable reminder from the darkness outside his third-floor window that the world held phenomena beyond his comprehension. It remains a disquieting presence, but one he now carries, a strange, invisible weight. He coexists with the mystery. That is the only conclusion he ever reached. Hemlock Creek materialized from the skeletal embrace of northern Michigan pines, a town breathing shallowly under a low gray sky. My business there felt like an intrusion, particularly outside the brief pulse of hunting season. This was a place stitched together by habit, where porch lights blinked out in unison before 9. The Blackwater Lodge, sole sentinel for weary travelers, stood 3 stories tall, a monument to faded grandeur. Its facade sagged, paint peeled like sunburnt skin, and the air within clung thick with the ghosts of damp and decay. Still, horizontal was horizontal, and exhaustion muted complaint. Check-in was a transaction steeped in unspoken currents. The woman behind the scarred counter offered the key, a heavy brass thing with averted eyes, her gaze perpetually snagged by the gloom-drenched corridor stretching behind her. A tremor danced in her periphery, brief, brittle, dismissed as fatigue. mine and perhaps hers, I ascended the groaning staircase, each tread a complaint against my weight. 3rd floor, room 309. The door yielded with a sigh, revealing the expected tableau: a bed aspiring to comfort, a scarred dresser, a flimsy desk huddled beneath a weak yellow bulb. My travel-worn duffel landed on the questionable quilt with a thud that seemed too loud in the sepulchral silence. Hours dissolved into the quiet drone of my laptop, the silence outside absolute, unmarred by traffic or the murmur of fellow guests. It pressed in, this quiet, breeding a chill that had little to do with the dying autumn air. A prickle crawled my spine, the distinct, irrational sensation of observation. A scan of the room, a rattle of the already locked doorknob, a forced return to the screen's glow. Paranoia, I chided myself. Just the weight of isolation. Midnight arrived, heavy and final. The bathroom's fluorescent tube stuttered, casting epileptic shadows as I brushed my teeth. Then, a sound, faint, insidious, like frayed cloth whispering against plaster, leaking from the wall. I froze, toothbrush hovering. Silence rushed back in. Old plumbing, I reasoned, the groans of a weary structure. Finishing my ablutions, I killed the lights, plunging the room into an inkwell darkness. The silence returned, thick as velvet, pressing down. Sleep beckoned, a welcome oblivion. But just as consciousness frayed, the murmur returned. Closer now. A sibilant breath, indistinct words tangled just beyond the partition behind the headboard. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I sat bolt upright, straining into the blackness. "Anyone there?" The query was a dry rasp, swallowed instantly by the void. Nothing. Just the building settling, surely. The wind finding a crack in the eaves. Yet conviction wavered. Sliding from the bed, bare feet meeting the cool, worn floorboards. I pressed an ear to the floral-patterned wallpaper. Cold plaster, dead silence. Back beneath the covers, cocooned but not comforted, the unease coiled tighter. Eyes shut, breath deliberately slowed, I fought the rising tide of nameless dread. Then, a rap, soft, thready, not quite on the door, but near it, from it, perhaps from within the wall beside it. My heart leaped, silence again. The bedside clock glowed, 2:03 a.m. A late arrival fumbling in the corridor? Possible, yet the sound had felt internal, muffled, wrong. I remained rigid, listening, the silence amplifying the thrum of blood in my ears. Trapped, watched, waiting for sleep felt like lowering my guard. Time stretched. Eventually, exhaustion warred with fear, forcing me back down. Deep breaths. It's an old building, it's your imagination. Eyes closed, and then, a feather-light touch, impossibly cold, brushing my cheek. My eyes flew open, a sliver of hallway light cut across the floor. The door I had explicitly locked, dead bolted, stood ajar. Panic, cold and sharp, propelled me out of bed. Trembling fingers fumbled for the light switch, which stayed stubbornly dark. The hallway, glimpsed through the crack, was a study in shadows and silence. Empty. I pushed the door shut, the click of the lock echoing unnaturally. The deadbolt slid home with a decisive thunk. Back in bed, nerves screaming, the darkness felt different now, violated. Then came a new sound, a faint, dry scrap, like fingernails dragging across wood, emanating from the adjacent room. It began, it stopped. Utter silence resumed. Something was fundamentally wrong. Rising again, compelled by a need to understand, I approached the connecting wall and knocked softly. Tap, tap, tap. The silence that answered was absolute. Downstairs. I needed confirmation, needed to ask the distracted woman about the occupant next door. Perhaps they'd heard it too. The lobby was vast, empty, amplifying my footsteps on the worn linoleum. The reception desk stood vacant. Hello? My voice bounced off the high ceilings, returning unanswered. I waited, scanning the dim space, the peeling paint, the dusty ferns. Then my eye caught it, lying open on the counter, an old guest ledger, or perhaps a maintenance log, pages filled with faded ink. Beside it, a brittle, hand-drawn floor plan of the lodge. Curiosity overriding caution, I leaned closer. Floor by floor, room by numbered room. First floor, second floor, third floor, 301, 303, 305, 307, 309. A gap, a blank space where 309 should have been. A visceral coldness, unrelated to the building's chill, snaked up my spine. My breath hitched. I traced the lines again, disbelief warring with the stark visual evidence. According to this map, this aged document lying open as if waiting, the room I inhabited did not exist. I recoiled from the desk, the lobby floor seeming to tilt beneath my feet. Was this a dream? A prank? Or had the tired seams of reality frayed somewhere between the highway and this decaying lodge? Wheeling around, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I fled back towards the stairs. The third-floor landing felt altered. The shadows seemed deeper, the air heavier, the silence charged. I walked the corridor slowly, deliberately, forcing myself to count the brass numerals on the doors. 301, 303, 305, 307. Then nothing but an uninterrupted expanse of faded, water-stained wallpaper. Then 301, where my door had stood, where room 309 had been mere moments ago, there was only wall, solid, continuous. I reached out a trembling hand, fingers brushing the cool, slightly textured surface. Real, undeniably real. And from the shadows behind me, impossibly close, a whisper slithered, formless and cold. I didn't turn. I bolted, down the corridor, stumbling on the groaning stairs, bursting through the heavy front doors into the biting pre-dawn air. The car keys felt alien in my shaking grasp. I drove, engine roaring into the oppressive stillness, leaving Hemlock Creek and the Blackwater Lodge shrinking in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the pines and the lingering, inexplicable dread. What threshold I crossed that night, what pocket of unreality I briefly occupied, remains a chilling enigma. But the solid wall where my room ceased to be is a truth I cannot unlearn. I will never go back. I recall the precise morning the man next door erupted from his apartment as if summoned to the most critical juncture of his existence. The slam of his door resonated down the corridor. Tucked beneath one arm, a small leather satchel. His shirt, a canvas of old paint splatters. His forearms bore the dried, streaked testament of pigments. From my own threshold, I observed his passage. He offered no glance my way, no parting word, merely vanished down the hall, the echo of his footfalls swallowed by the worn linoleum. That was the last I ever laid eyes on him. My name is Julian. Home is a cramped space on the 5th floor of a building whose bones groan and settle on blustery nights. Utilities are fickle companions here. Power flickers, water runs glacial. Yet the rent is forgiving, and familiarity breeds a certain tolerance. The neighbor, Silas Vane, I'll call him, though the name never passed his lips in my hearing, had occupied the adjacent unit for perhaps 8 months. A man of few words, Silas. Sometimes a nod acknowledged my presence in the shared hallway. Other times, his gaze remained fixed earthward, his pace quickening past my door. I'd gleaned he was an artist of some sort, catching fragmented views of stretched canvases, or the unwrapping of new brushes near the mail slots downstairs. An invitation inside was never extended, nor did I seek one. His life, I reasoned, was his own affair, yet a persistent curiosity lingered. He moved with the air of someone perceiving a different stratum of reality. His attire consistently bore the marks of his craft: paint, charcoal dust, worn not with carelessness, but indifference. So, that morning, his frantic departure, followed by unending absence, struck a dissonant chord within me. A day drifted by, then 2. I conjured explanations. A sudden trip, perhaps, an exhibition demanding his presence. But Silas Vane did not reappear, and his door, inexplicably, remained unlocked. The wrongness of it gnawed at me, an insistent burr under the skin. Several nights later, a sliver of light pierced the gloom. The building's peculiar architecture grants my living room side window a partial vista into his apartment, provided the curtains stand ajar. And on that night, they did, parted just enough. My gaze snagged on a canvas dominating his living space, far larger than any I'd seen him transport. It rested upon an easel, starkly unfinished, yet steeped in somber hues. Squinting, I strained to decipher the forms. A shape emerged, vaguely humanoid, draped in robes, or perhaps a hood, silhouetted against a nocturnal expanse. A prickling sensation crawled over me, the distinct feeling of trespassing on something intensely private. The following morning found me hesitating by his door. Unlocked, my hand hovered near the knob, a traitorous pulse beginning to thrum against my ribs. Concern, I told myself. Simple, neighborly concern. What if misfortune had befallen him? Injury? Worse? I pushed the door inward. The faint, sharp perfume of oil paints and turpentine met me. Silence reigned. The apartment was empty. It presented as ordinary, save for the living room, commandeered as a studio. Drop cloths draped the floor like pale shrouds. Tubes of pigment lay scattered amidst soiled brushes. A wooden stand nearby held half-empty bottles of linseed oil and a pair of sketchbooks. And there, commanding the room, stood the immense canvas I'd glimpsed. It depicted a nocturnal forest, dense and forbidding, dominated by a solitary figure, cloaked and hooded, positioned near a skeletal tree. The figure seemed to lean forward, yet no face resided beneath the hood, only shadow. Raw canvas bordered the scene. The hands and lower form lacked definition. Deep blues and blacks bled into one another across the background, applied with thick, agitated strokes, suggesting haste or immense pressure. Paint glistened wetly on a nearby pallet. Brushes lay discarded on a table, as if dropped mid-thought. Tentatively, I touched the bristles of one, damp, slick with oil. A profound unease settled over me. Why would Silas abandon such a significant undertaking? The canvas radiated importance, the potential magnum opus left fractured. Yet he was gone. My eyes scanned for any trace, any clue. The small kitchen yielded only unwashed plates and cups on the counter. The bathroom was dark, undisturbed. His bedroom door yawned open onto Spartan emptiness. A bare mattress, clothes heaped on the floor, a solitary lamp. Drawn back to the living room, I stood once more before the painting. My own breathing sounded loud in the stillness. The hooded figure, eyeless though it was, seemed to fix its attention upon me. A tremor ran through me as I reached out, fingertips brushing the canvas edge. Sticky residue, a deep cerulean, stained my skin. I retreated, pulling the door shut, engaging the interior lock. The act felt transgressive, yet necessary. The thought of another wanderer stumbling in was unsettling. I pocketed the key, a small, weighty piece of guilt, promising myself its safekeeping until Silas Vane's return. That evening, a solitary meal did little to soothe my disquiet. An old action film flickered on the television, a futile attempt at distraction. My thoughts persistently circled back to the painting, to the shadowed void beneath the hood. A constriction tightened in my chest. Overreaction, I chided myself. Then, near midnight, as I extinguished my lights, preparing for bed, a soft luminescence caught my eye. It emanated from Silas's apartment window, a gentle glow as from a single lamp. My movements ceased. Had he returned? But why the secrecy? No reason existed for him to evade me. Peering through my window, the angle restricted my view, revealing only a segment of his living area. Yet the easel was visible, bathed in that soft light. I watched, breathless for a minute. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then, a sound reached me. Faint, rhythmic, unmistakable. The whisper of bristles across canvas. A cold sweat beaded on my forehead. I murmured his name, a futile whisper lost against the glass. Another minute passed. The sound persisted, a deliberate cadence. Stroke, pause, stroke, pause. It continued for perhaps 2 minutes longer. Then abruptly, the light winked out. Morning light brought with it the temptation to dismiss the night's events as figments of an anxious mind. Yet a deeper compulsion urged me to verify, to see if the painting bore witness. The key felt heavy, illicit in my hand as I slipped back into Silas's apartment. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. Then I approached the easel, and a cold dread pooled in my stomach. The figure in the painting had evolved. The hood possessed finer detail now, subtle folds catching non-existent light. Hints of shading suggested the contours of a hidden face. The barren tree behind it sported new, more intricate branches. I rubbed my eyes, grappling with disbelief. The paint radiated freshness. Bending closer, the potent aroma of linseed oil and pigment assaulted my senses. New streaks of color, stark against the older layers, seemed to vibrate with recent application. I scanned the room again. No footprints marred the drop cloths, no sign of intrusion. The phenomenon became a nightly ritual. The spectral light, the whispering brushstrokes, arriving at capricious hours, sometimes 10, sometimes closer to 2. Each occurrence triggered a jolt of adrenaline, rooting me to the spot. My gut clenched, a clammy chill slicked my skin. I would stand sentinel at my window, a prisoner of morbid fascination, until the light inevitably died. Sleep became a shallow, fraught state. The slightest creak of the old building snapped my eyes open. A persistent weakness invaded my limbs, my stomach churning at the mere thought of that canvas. On the 5th night, determination warring with terror, I resolved to stay awake, to witness whatever transpired. Ensconced in darkness in my own living room, I fixed my gaze on the window opposite. Near midnight, The anticipated glow ignited within Silas's apartment. A faint silhouette materialized, hovering near the easel, indistinct yet undeniably humanoid, tall, leaning intently over the canvas. The brushing sound resumed, measured, meticulous. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My palms grew slick with sweat. A primal urge to storm over warred with an equally potent paralysis anchoring my legs. I watched, ensnared by fear. After several minutes, the silhouette stilled. It seemed, impossibly, to turn towards my window, though no features were discernible. I held my breath. The light extinguished. The presence vanished. Dawn could not arrive quickly enough. I forced myself, legs trembling slightly, to confront the painting once more. The door remained locked from within. Inside, the transformation was stark. The figure now possessed eyes, or approximations thereof. 2 circles rendered in a flat, reflective pigment that nonetheless seemed unnervingly bright under the apartment's overhead light. They tracked my movement across the room. The cloak's fabric appeared sharper, more defined. I traced the surface with a hesitant finger. Patches felt distinctly wet. Shaking, I struggled to reconcile the impossible. Silas remained absent. His meager possessions lay untouched. Only the painting breathed with this uncanny, evolving life. The realization struck me then, cold and sharp. This was no longer mere discomfort. It was fear, genuine, suffocating fear. My chest felt banded, swallowing became difficult. I fled the apartment, locking it behind me. The remainder of the day passed in a haze. Attempts at normalcy failed. My thoughts were tethered to that canvas, those phantom brushstrokes, those nascent eyes. Seeking refuge in a bustling cafe, I stared into my coffee cup, the warmth against my palms a stark contrast to the chill within. The surrounding chatter and laughter felt alien, distant. That night, I armed myself with technology. My phone, mounted on a tripod, aimed squarely at Silas's window. I sat in the enveloping darkness, a knot of anticipation tightening in my stomach. Around 1 a.m., the light flickered to life. The shadowy artisan reappeared. I zoomed in, desperate for detail, but the image remained frustratingly blurred, a mere wraith of movement against the illuminated backdrop. A slow, prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck, the undeniable feeling of being observed. 10 minutes crawled by, punctuated by the rhythmic scrape of the unseen brush. Then, darkness reclaimed the opposite window. Heart pounding, I snatched up my phone, replaying the footage. Darkness, a barely perceptible flicker of movement, more like a digital artifact than tangible evidence. The figure remained an impenetrable silhouette. Frustration curdled into a deeper dread. Multiple replays yielded nothing concrete. A voice screamed within me to confront whatever was over there, but fear held me fast, sweat cooling on my skin, breath catching in my throat. The thought of facing that entity alone was paralyzing. Waiting for sunrise felt like an eternity. Key in hand, I crossed the threshold once more. Before the painting, my stomach clenched violently. The hooded figure verged on lifelike. Intricate folds cascaded down the cloak. The eyes, more defined now, held a faint, moist glimmer, reflecting the room's light with disturbing realism. Subtle details emerged on the hands. Long fingers, slightly curled, though still partially merging with the tenebrous background. The tree's branches twisted at unnatural angles that induced a wave of nausea. A faint creak echoed from somewhere deeper within the apartment. I spun around, heart leaping. Empty. Touching the canvas confirmed my fears. Wet again. My fingertips came away smeared with a dark pigment. Black, or perhaps the deepest violet. Fresh brush marks marred the easel's wooden frame, mute testimony to a recent presence. My pulse roared in my ears. Action was imperative. This couldn't continue. Seizing a dusty sheet from Silas's couch, I flung it over the painting, obscuring the unsettling image. A shallow breath escaped me, a fleeting sense of control. Back in my own apartment, a fragile calm settled, the belief that concealment might halt the process. Futile hope. That night, the light blazed brighter than ever, as if every bulb in the room had been ignited. The brushing sound returned, louder, more forceful, strong, rapid strokes against the canvas. Through my window, I saw the crumpled sheet lying discarded on the floor. Restlessness consumed me. I paced my living room, shoulders knotted, feet refusing stillness. Calling the authorities seemed ludicrous. What explanation could I offer? A spectral artist? Self-completing artwork? I sank onto my couch, hands clenched, waiting. When next I dared to look, the light was gone. Sleep offered no escape. Dawn found me exhausted but resolute. Back I went, dread a cold stone in my gut. The painting stood unveiled. The figure now possessed the clear contours of a face. No distinct nose or mouth, but the flesh tones were present, shading hollows beneath cheekbones, defining a forehead. The eyes stared wide, reflecting some unseen horror, their glossy finish capturing the morning light with unnerving intensity. My throat constricted. The impulse to remove the painting, to hide it, perhaps even destroy it, warred with a paralyzing inertia. Building regulations on disposal flashed through my mind, a bizarrely mundane concern amidst the supernatural. The mere thought of handling the large canvas alone brought on dizziness, a profound physical weakness. Subtle sounds began to intrude upon the daylight hours, the tap of a brush, a soft shuffle on the drop cloths. Each noise froze me mid-motion, heart hammering, ears straining. Investigations always yielded nothing. Paranoia became my constant companion. Work became impossible. Flimsy excuses offered over the phone met with my boss's thinning patience. My world shrank to the confines of my apartment, my existence dedicated to observing the space next door. Sometimes the light would flash momentarily, then vanish. Sometimes a fleeting glimpse of the shape within, always near the easel. Day by day, the painting accrued detail. A silver trim materialized along the hood's edge. The figure's hands achieved an uncanny realism. The tree bark gained texture. The background sprouted new, disturbing elements. Distant, ambiguous lights, perhaps stars. I found myself drawn repeatedly into Silas's apartment, standing before the canvas, chest tight, breath shallow, mesmerized by its relentless expansion. My deepest fear crystallized, its imminent completion. A creeping certainty took root, that the final brushstroke would herald something, an emergence, a manifestation. No poetry colors the thought, just a visceral, bodily dread. My muscles lock at the notion, my mouth turns arid, my head aches. I'm attempting to gather myself, to formulate a plan. This record, scribbled onto a notepad because my hands tremble too violently for typing, is part of that effort. One part of me screams to slash the canvas to ribbons. Another whispers that such an act might unleash something far worse. Is the painting a vessel, a restraint? Madness laps at the edges of these thoughts. But each night the light returns. The brush whispers, the figure solidifies, and I remain powerless. Seated now at my small kitchen table, I write. Intermittently, my gaze drifts to the living room window. Darkness holds sway in Silas Vane's apartment for now, but I wait for the glow. My stomach is a tight knot of ice. Sweat prickles my skin despite the room's chill. If that figure acquires a complete face, I don't know what follows. I don't know if I can remain here. I no longer harbor any wish to see Silas Vane again. I crave only silence, stillness, an image forever arrested in its becoming. Because the alternative, the creeping conviction that something truly monstrous is taking shape next door, is a weight I cannot bear. So I wait. I watch. Tonight might be the night the painting finishes itself. Terror holds me captive. I cannot stop looking through the window, and I cannot bring myself to turn away. Silence, thick as velvet, draped the pre-dawn hour. 3:00 a.m. My hand hovered, stalled mid-reach for the light switch, arrested by the quietest tick. A shutter sound, impossibly small, yet it echoed like a gunshot in the void of my presumed solitude. Turning, a glacial dread crept through my veins. Across the cavernous dark of the living room, a single crimson eye pulsed, the insistent blink of a recording light, an unseen audience, and the chilling conviction bloomed. This performance had been running longer than I knew. Ilara, that's the name etched on the lease, the identity inhabiting what was supposed to be sanctuary, now transformed into a stage for some unseen voyeur. 3 months prior, this resplendent loft, carved from the bones of a repurposed factory in the city's pulsing core, had felt like destiny. Exposed brick whispered history, ceilings vaulted towards impossible heights. Ms. Albright, the agent, had sung the praises of its integrated intelligence, lights that anticipated need, air that breathed on command, security woven into its very walls. Perfection, she'd called it. A gilded cage, I now suspected. Halcyon days, those first weeks were. I moved through the sun-drenched space, intoxicated by the sheer volume of it, the feeling of anchorage, of mine. Then, whispers of wrongness began to thread through the quiet. Subtle dissonances at first, a lamp illuminating a corner I'd left in shadow, the climate control humming at a temperature alien to my preference. Waking once, deep in the night's embrace, to the spectral glow of the television, broadcasting some unknown drama into the empty room. Forgetfulness, I told myself. New home jitters. Yet the disquietude coiled tighter, an insidious presence, a persistent prickle on the skin, the sensation of unseen scrutiny. Phantom movements flickered at the edge of vision, dissolving upon direct gaze, until the click, that tiny, damning sound in the 3:00 a.m. dark. Motionless, I stared into the cyclopean pulse. Questions swarmed. How long? What else lurked within these walls? My hand, trembling violently, finally found the switch, flooding the room with harsh, revealing light. Then began the hunt. An hour yielded a sickening harvest. 3 more lenses, nested with chilling precision. One peered from the haven of my bedroom. Another surveyed the intimacy of the bathroom. A third presided over the kitchen. Tiny, artfully concealed intrusions. Without the initial betrayal of the sound, they would have remained invisible parasites. The feeling wasn't just violation, it was a profound defilement. Who held the other end of these gazes? And what hunger drove their silent observation? Instinct screamed for the authorities, but a colder logic intervened as my fingers hovered over the phone. What if the rot went deeper? What if the watchers wore badges? This demanded strategy, not blind panic. Escape was imperative, yet ignorance was my only shield. I couldn't betray my discovery. Feigning normalcy became a desperate performance. I gathered essentials, clothes, toiletries, laptop, into a bag, each movement measured, deliberate. A call to Lena, forcing buoyancy into my tone. "Just need a break, a different view," I'd chirped, praying the tremor wasn't audible. Exiting my violated sanctuary, the hallway seemed suddenly populated by unnervingly attentive eyes. The Abernathys, the elderly pair opposite, Julian, the sleek professional next door. Had their scrutiny always been this intense, this focused? Their collective gaze felt like a physical weight as I retreated towards the elevator's steel embrace. Days bled together under Lena's roof, a borrowed refuge that offered little solace. I was skittish, haunted by the phantom touch of observation. The internet became my abyss, swallowing hours as I plunged into the dark realities of hidden optics, digital stalking, the architecture of surveillance. Each article, each forum post, amplified the dread. This wasn't isolated. Whispers echoed across the city. Inexplicable sounds, technology gone rogue, the persistent unease of being perceived. Dismissed as glitches, as nerves frayed by urban living. But I recognized the pattern, the chilling resonance. My experience wasn't an anomaly, it was a symptom, and I craved the diagnosis. A flimsy pretext, forgotten clothes, drew me back to the loft. This time, I carried armor. A signal detector borrowed from Marcus, my tech-adept colleague, spun with a tale of a paranoid ex. The threshold crossed, the device erupted, a frantic chorus of electronic discovery. Not merely eyes, but ears too. My home was saturated with unseen receivers. Yet the signals pulsed beyond my walls, weaving a web throughout the entire structure. A frantic pulse hammered against my ribs as I traced the electronic breadcrumbs downwards into the building's subterranean depths. They converged on a nondescript locked door marked "Maintenance. Authorized personnel only." A lie. The detector screamed truth. This was the nerve center. Prudence shrieked retreat, urged contact with the outside world. But a consuming, reckless curiosity eclipsed all reason. Skills gleaned from frantic, late-night online tutorials guided my trembling fingers, and the lock yielded with a soft click. The sight within stole the air from my lungs, leaving an icy void. Banks of monitors glowed, a constellation of stolen moments, lives laid bare, neighbors moving through domestic routines, oblivious to the unseen audience. My own apartment, stark and empty on one screen, a silent testament. But the scope, it stretched far beyond these walls. Feeds flickered from across the metropolis, workspaces, cafes, public squares, a vast clandestine panopticon capturing the city's unscripted drama. Lost in the horrifying tableau, a subtle sound snagged my attention. I spun. Julian, my neighbor, filled the doorway, not with alarm, but with unnerving expectancy. "We wondered when you'd arrive, Ilara." His voice, smooth as river stone. "Your perception is notable. It's why you were selected." Selected? The word stumbled out. For what? A smile touched his lips, devoid of warmth. For membership. We observed. We assessed. Consider this your graduation. Behind him, figure materialized, coalescing into a familiar gallery. The Abernathys, Ms. Albright, even Chloe, the cheerful barista. They encircled me, their collective gaze sharp, proprietary. "What is this?" I demanded, voice straining against the tide of fear. "Some bizarre collective?" Julian chuckled, a dry rasp. "Ilara, this transcends such simple labels. We are the Sentinels. We witness all. We comprehend all. And you now are initiated." Reality fractured. Surreal, terrifying, yet undeniably present in the flicker of countless captured lives. And refusal? The question felt futile, even as I voiced it. Julian's smile iced over. "Not feasible, Ilara. Your awareness makes you integral. You align with us, or complications arise. We safeguard our endeavors." Cornered, yes, but beneath the terror, a treacherous flicker of fascination sparked. The sheer scale of their knowledge, the omniscient perspective. It possessed an insidious allure. "What is required?" The question escaped me, alien and shocking. A subtle easing rippled through the assembly. "Resume your existence," Julian instructed. "Maintain appearances. Instructions will find you." Emerging from the basement felt like surfacing from a deep dive. Reality warped and pressurized. Life irrevocably altered. I had stumbled into the heart of an unimaginable web, and now its threads clung to me. The ensuing weeks passed in a haze of forced routine. I moved through my days, acutely conscious of the ubiquitous lenses, but now my own gaze had sharpened. I started seeing them, the subtle glint in a ventilation grate, the unnerving stillness of certain individuals in crowded places. The watchers and the watched. Then, the envelope. Plain, anonymous, slid beneath my door like a secret sin. Inside, a name, coordinates, and directives for planting another eye. My hands trembled, the weight of complicity settling upon me. I stood at a precipice. Embrace the shadow, join the ranks of the perpetual observers, forfeit authentic existence, or resist, ignite a conflict, gamble everything on defiance. Even now, penning these words, the path remains shrouded, but this certainty holds. The surface of reality is a fragile veneer. Beneath it, eyes proliferate, endlessly watching, endlessly cataloging. Awareness, once gained, is an irreversible exile from the sanctuary of ignorance. Heed the prickle on your neck, the feeling of being observed. In this meticulously documented age, perhaps paranoia is simply clarity.